Mic check. Yes. Check, check. Mic check 1 2. Can you hear me? Is everything audible? Okay, great. All right, guys. So we have a couple things to talk about today in today's lecture. Microphone check. Is the audio fine? Excellent. Yes, mic check, mic check. 1 2 1 2. All right. So let's discuss the physical act of swiping and scrolling on a touchscreen is not just a neutral navigation method. It is a meticulously engineered motor sensory loop. Tech designers and cognitive scientists design these kinetic motions to bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the primitive nervous system. First, when examining the actual physical motion of scrolling up and swiping, there are clear biological and biomechanical reasons why these physical gestures trigger stronger, more addictive, and physically demanding responses in female users. So, first, let's discuss the kinesthetic engineering of the lever pull. The physical motion of scrolling up, especially the pull to refresh mechanism, originally designed by software developer Lauren Britcher, was modeled directly after the physical mechanics of a casino slot machine lever. So, the physical act of swiping and scrolling on a touchscreen is not just a neutral navigation method. It is a meticulously engineered motor sensory loop. Tech designers and cognitive scientists design these kinetic motions to bypass the rational mind and speak directly to the primitive nervous system. When examining the actual physical motion of scrolling up and swiping, there are clear biological and biomechanical reasons why these physical gestures trigger stronger, more addictive, and physically demanding responses in female users. The kinesthetic engineering of the lever pull. Let's discuss that first. Yeah. The kinesthetic the kinesthetic engineering of the lever pull. The physical motion of scrolling up, especially the pull to refresh mechanism, originally designed by software developer Lauren Bircher, was modeled directly after the physical mechanics of a casino slot machine lever. The somatic reward cue. When a user pulls down on the screen to load new content, they experience a physical drag, tension, followed by a kinetic snap, release. The brain processes this physical resistance as a somatic prediction test. Anticipation dopamine versus completion dopamine. Dopamine is fundamentally a seeking and anticipatory chemical rather than a pleasure chemical. The physical movement of the thumb sliding across glass lights up the brain's motor planning center, the basal ganglia, which is directly wired to the forebrain and the reward seeking pathway, the ventral tegmental area, or VTA. Because the swipe is physically effortless, frictionless design, the motor sensory loop closes and reopens in milliseconds. The loss of unit bias. Before infinite scrolling was popularized by developer Asa Raskin in 2006, digital media was paginated. Reaching the bottom of a page provided a physical completion cue. By eliminating the kinetic pause of clicking next, the hand stays locked in a continuous, unbroken, kinetic motor pattern. The physical nervous system never receives a somatic signal of completion, meaning the brain does not naturally disengage. Women and heightened somatosensory sensitivity. The biological and neurological differences in how men and women physically perceive touch play a massive role in how addictive the physical act of scrolling becomes. mechanoreceptor density, and tactile acuity. Somatosensory and biophysical studies confirm that women, on average, have significantly higher tactile spatial resolution and dynamic touch sensitivity than men. This difference is directly linked to hand anthropometry. Smaller finger sizes have a much higher density of tactile mechanoreceptors, specifically Merkel discs, which process static, fine detail touch, and Meissner corpuscles, which process dynamic, active, sliding touch. Hypersensitized somatosensory loops. Because females have a denser distribution of Meissner corpuscles on their fingertips, the actual dynamic friction, thermal changes, and haptic microvibrations of the smartphone screen are transmitted to the female brain with significantly greater neural resolution. The impact of visual tactile preference. Research in human computer interaction, HCI, demonstrates that the presence of sharp, tactile, and haptic feedback on touchscreens dramatically increases both the user's focus and their overall preference, leading to significantly longer session times. For women who biologically process these tactile sensations more intensely, the somatic pleasure of the screen's physical response makes the kinesthetic habit of swiping far more reinforcing. The physical swipe as an emotional buffer and dorsal vagal drift. Because of gender specific psychological and social pressures, women are statistically more likely to use image focused, relationship centric social media platforms as tools for emotional regulation and coping. This emotional pattern interacts directly with the physical movement of the thumb, the somatic shield. When the nervous system registers distress, anxiety, or loneliness, the brain seeks immediate regulation. The somatic loop of picking up the phone and performing the highly repetitive, rhythmic motion of scrolling acts as a physical, emotional buffer. Dorsal vagal drift, disassociation, dissociation. During prolonged scrolling, a subthreshold version of dissociation occurs, known in neuroscience as dorsal vagal drift. The user's physical body completely stills, breathing becomes shallow, heart rate variability alters, and peripheral awareness narrows. The thumb is the only part of the motor system that remains hyper awake and active. The trap of numbing. The motor loop of the swipe inserts safe physical distance between the user and their immediate emotional reality. Because women show higher statistical trends of using social media for relational coping and emotional distress relief, This kinetic numbing behavior is quickly codified by the VTA as a highly successful escape mechanism, turning a voluntary action into an automated, involuntary somatic habit. Biomechanical mismatch, the gendered physical toll. While touchscreens are designed with a one size fits all approach, the physical dimensions of smartphones are both biologically mismatched with female hand biomechanics, leading to heightened physical strain that feeds back into cognitive fatigue. Thumb overuse injuries. Standard phone whiffs require users to hold the device firmly with one hand while repeatedly reaching, stretching, and pushing with the thumb. This repetitive motion, undergone without forearm support, frequently causes tendon shear, synovial irritation, and cumulative microtrauma in the thumb's flexor and extensor tendons, leading to painful clinical conditions like the Curvain's tenosynovitis, often called texting thumb. Kinetic feedback of pain and fatigue. Due to smaller hands, women must utilize a much higher percentage of their maximum voluntary muscle contraction to perform the same repetitive swiping gestures on tablets and large smartphones. Musculoskeletal strain and the nervous system. A multivariate epidemiological analysis revealed that the odds for females to develop musculoskeletal symptoms, including text neck and upper extremity repetitive strain from touchscreen devices, are now over two times higher, 2.059 times, than for males. This chronic physical fatigue does not stop the loop. Rather, it elevates systemic cortisol, the stress hormone. The brain, exhausted by physical strain, experiences brain rot or cognitive overstimulation, excuse me, or cognitive overstimulation, which reduces prefrontal cortex executive control and leaves the user even more vulnerable to the effortless, lazy dopamine hits of the next swipe. To fully grasp the insidious nature of the screen swipe gesture, we must look past the interface design and examine the raw biophysics, biomechanics, and neurobiology. The physical act of scrolling up is a highly optimized sensory motor loop that alters your nervous system's architecture. For women, this somatic trap is dramatically magnified by documented biological, anatomical, and somatosensory differences. The biophysics of tactile acuity and receptor density. The physical sensation of sliding a finger across chemically treated oleophobic glass is not felt the same way by male and female bodies. The scaling law of somatosensory afference. The human hand is innervated by a relatively fixed number of sensory nerve fibers that do not scale proportionally with body size. Consequently, smaller bodies and limbs possess a significantly higher density of mechanoreceptors packed into a smaller surface area. The finger size predictor. Landmark psychophysical studies demonstrate that passive tactile spatial acuity, the ability to resolve fine surface detail, is directly predicted by fingertip size. Because women, on average, have smaller fingers, they possess a much higher spatial density of Merkle discs. Because women, on average, have smaller fingers, they possess a much higher spatial density of Merkle discs, which process static, high resolution touch, and Meissner corpuscles, which process dynamic, active, sliding touch and friction. Sensory hyperamplification on glass. When a sliding finger across a capacitive touchscreen, the rapidly when sliding a finger across a capacitive touchscreen, the rapidly adapting type 1 afferent channels, Meissner corpuscles, detect dynamic microfrictions, electrostatic attractions, and surface vibrations. Because women possess a higher dynamic receptor density, the kinetic sensory feedback of swiping is transmitted to the female brain with a far greater neurological resolution and intense feedback. Frictional preference and attention locking. Human computer interaction, HCI research shows that the presence of sharp haptic tactile feedback on screen glass dramatically increases a user's physiological focus and preference, leading to a significant increase in overall session and interaction times. For women, the physical slide is a highly stimulating tactile experience that makes the simple physical action intensely self reinforcing. Biomechanical mismatch and musculoskeletal strain. The physical architecture of modern smartphones is biologically mismatched with female hand anthropometry, transforming a one size fits all device into a source of chronic physical and cognitive stress. High percentage muscle loading. Quantitative electromyography and joint movement studies reveal that during touchscreen navigation and swiping, women utilize a significantly higher percentage of their maximum voluntary muscle contraction across key forearm muscles, including the extensor carpi radialis, extensor digitorum, and flexor carpi radialis. Extreme postural deviation, reaching across multiple large screen displays with one thumb forces the hand into extreme non neutral postures. This causes repetitive, severe ulnar deviation and wrist extension, which strains the forearm tendons and irritates the retinicular sheath of the thumb. This repeatedly triggers cumulative microtrauma, leading to clinical conditions such as texting thumb. Ooh. The 2.059 times musculoskeletal risk factor. The multivariate epidemiological analysis of mobile device usage patterns established that the odds for females to develop musculoskeletal symptoms, tension neck, shoulder, and upper extremity repetitive strain from tablet and smartphone usage are 2.059 times higher than for males. The cognitive fatigue feedback loop. This biomechanical strain does not cause the user to put the phone down. Instead, the physical strain raises systemic cortisol levels and causes cognitive overstimulation, brain rot. This exhaustion depletes the prefrontal cortex. This exhaustion depletes the prefrontal cortex, stripping the user of the executive control required to override the mindless kinetic loop. Rhythmic dissociation and the dorsal vagal buffer. Because women statistically experience higher rates of anxiety and are more likely to use relationship centric social platforms to cope with emotional distress, the physical gesture of scrolling serves as a literal somatic anesthesia. The somatic shield. When the brain experiences distress, the motor cortex recruits the repetitive, rhythmic, and physically effortless motion of swiping as a coping mechanism to distance the self from uncomfortable emotions. This dissociation, the rhythmic scrolling, triggers a subthreshold state of dissociation known as dorsal vagal drift. The user's physical body completely immobilizes, breathing becomes shallow, heart rate variability shifts, and peripheral environmental awareness narrows. The somatic nervous system disconnects to avoid overwhelm, leaving the hands motor system as the only active bridge to the outside world. The empty reward cycle, this physical containment creates temporary distance but fails to process the underlying emotions. When the when the scroll loop is interrupted, the original negative emotions return, accompanied by physical exhaustion, tension, and a drop in dopamine, prompting the hand to automatically reach for the device to open a new loop. Have you ever picked up your phone to check a single notification only to wake up from a trance 45 minutes later feeling anxious, physically tense, and exhausted? It is not a lack of self discipline, it is a highly engineered somatic trap. In this premiere episode of our podcast, we dismantle the shocking hidden science behind the touchscreen gestures you use every single day. We pull back the curtain on the glass trap, proving that the physical act of swiping up was meticulously modeled after casino slot machines to bypass your rational mind and speak directly to your primitive nervous system. But the most alarming discovery is how this kinetic architecture is biologically and biomechanically weaponized against women. Your inability to put down your phone isn't a lack of discipline. It's a biological exploit of your fingertips' physical surface area. Let me explain the neuroscience of the glass trap. Standard smartphones were built for male hand anthropometry. By forcing your hand to swipe across these screens, tech platforms have triggered a 2.059 times spike in female musculoskeletal strain and prefrontal exhaustion. Silicon Valley engineered the swipe gesture to target a specific sensory nerve in your hand. Because women biologically have smaller fingers, you possess a far higher density of Meissner touch corpuscles, making the physical slide on glass highly addictive. When you scroll, you think you are relaxing, but under the surface, your body is entering a low level dissociative state called dorsal vagal drift. Your heart rate variably alters, your breath shallows, and only your thumb stays awake. There is a physical reason you can read a 300-page book but get exhausted after 10 minutes of scrolling. Tech platforms deliberately stripped the completion cues from their screens to keep your nervous system in a state of perpetual anticipation.